Allen Lund Company wishes all the owner-operators out there a Happy New Year. OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
It's deadline day for comments on an FMCSA proposal that would add some transparency to the brokerage industry. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association submitted their comments in support of the proposal early Tuesday morning. Mark Schremmer of Landline Magazine joined Scott Thompson to discuss what happens next and how you can submit your thoughts while you still have time. Also on today's program, a lot of things can mess up your truck while you're on the road, but one of the biggest is when your truck hits a large animal. For years, officials have looked for ways to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, and some think they found a solution, including Oregon. That's where they're building a wildlife crossing across Interstate 5. I'll talk with Dan Roberts of the Oregon Department of Transportation. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. The deadline to file comments with FMCSA on its proposed broker transparency reforms is here. If you're listening to this before midnight Eastern Time or 9 p.m. Pacific, you've still got a little more time to let the agency hear what you think about their bid to bring transparency to the broker business model. Joining us with the details, Mark Schremmer, who's been tracking this issue from the start as senior editor of Landline Magazine. Mark, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
So a quick check here of the regulations.gov website as we look at it right now. We've got a few thousand comments that have already come in. That is a pretty strong showing so far.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just went over 4,000,
Right.
which is crazy. And you think we were going into this extended, 3-day weekend, it was right about 2,700. So to get 1,300, almost, half of the comments that it took the first 80-some days to get, and now we have that again. It does show, as we've talked about so many times, this is a proposal that has roots all the way back to May of 2020. It started with protests from individual truck drivers that went to Washington, D.C. to talk about this issue. And, we've seen, whether it was at the Mid-America Trucking Show in Louisville or any sort of listening session that the agencies have had on this, truckers are very passionate about this issue, and it's being reflected in the amount of comments that we're seeing now.
Yeah, and that number obviously will go up, I think, as the hours tick away here, and hopefully there will be more that come in because it does really make a statement to FMCSA when you've got a strong showing like this. We should, I think, probably, for those who maybe have not been paying attention to this very closely over the past few weeks, just kind of explain what this proposal would do. Essentially, it would really open up transparency, right, among the brokers out there.
Yeah. So if you go back, this is one of the things that makes this a little complicated, is to think that broker transparency regulations have existed for decades, all the way back to the 1980s. They're already there. But they haven't been enforced, and there have been a lot of loopholes that brokers have used to evade these regulations, and they've been, frankly, getting away with it for decades. What this would do includes 4 main provisions to kind of tighten things up. One of those would be that they would have to be this information that basically after any sort of business transaction was completed, that they would have to send the records to the shipper. The broker and the motor carrier would all have access to those. And what that would do, it would you think about claims and all of the fraudulent issues, everything out there would be out in front, and that's what we need. But one of the first provisions that we're looking at here is that they would have to be in an electronic format. One of the loopholes that brokers have used for a long time has been, okay, yeah, you can come look at these records.
Swing on by.
But yeah, just swing on by. I know you're out in California. Our offices are here in New Hampshire. Just come by sometime, and we'll get the old archives out, and you can take a look at them.
Right.
Email has existed for a while, and it seems like that's something very easy to do. And then there are several others that emphasize the fact that it's a regulatory obligation upon the brokers to do this. But there's there's also steps that OOIDA would like the agency to go even further to close these loopholes. But this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah. OOIDA has said this is not a perfect proposal. There is an issue there with some of the penalties, as you kind of pointed out there, and the punishments, or the lack thereof, I should say. But the association has fully supported this. They have said,
Sure.
Todd Spencer, in his words, said, hell yeah, this will make a difference during a fireside chat, and he spoke with us as well. The association did file comments on this, and for the most part, they follow that, right? That this would make a difference and really help a lot of people out there.
Yeah, certainly. And like I said, going back to that, saying that truckers in May of 2020 protested this, OOIDA followed that up with a petition shortly after for this rulemaking. And like I said, and you mentioned, OOIDA is very supportive of this proposal and everything that would go in. But one of the things out of that petition originally was that brokers would need to automatically send these within 48 hours. And the current proposal as it sits is upon request. And so basically that is one thing that, the association, while definitely supportive of this and supportive of the effort, they also emphasized that this is an additional step that if you really want this to work the way it should, to have everything and have a level playing field. And that is something that OOIDA mentioned in their comments several times, that phrase, level playing field.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, that automatic disclosure is going to be very important.
Yeah, this feels like one of these things that is a first step toward something bigger, and I know that that's what OOIDA hopes.
Oh, yeah.
This is, and it does seem like that on many levels. Just to remind people out there, again, the comments really do make a difference. There have been more than 4,000 or roughly 4,000 so far. Fightingfortruckers.com is the place to do that. And really, the idea is to submit your experiences, right?
Yeah.
And not just make this a form letter, but explain why you think this would make the industry better.
Yeah, and I think a big thing of this, if you're a driver that thinks that broker transparency is needed, but you also feel like this falls short on any level, file your comments, say that broker transparency is needed and that you support this, but also include where it falls short. Don't just go, well, it falls short, so I'm not even going to bother.
Right. Yeah.
Help be a part of the process to get it to where you want it to be, to get it to that up here. If it's right here now, get it all the way, up to the top level of where you think it needs to be to actually help you, your business, and highway safety.
Yeah, for sure. Fightingfortruckers.com really is the easiest way to go about doing this, submitting those comments, again, before midnight Eastern Standard Time, 11 p.m. Central, and 9 p.m. Pacific. Mark Schremmer, we know you've been covering this for a while, and you'll continue covering it, and we appreciate you stopping by and providing all the details for us.
Yeah, no problem.
We'll leave it there for now. Mark, thanks for walking us through everything. That was Mark Schremmer of Landline Magazine. I'm Scott Thompson. Mr. Rettig, we'll hand it over back to you.
Thanks, Scott. OOIDA is seeking the names and addresses of military personnel serving overseas to send them care packages. Call 816-229-5791 or email troops@ooida.com. Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, are at the Speedway Truck Stop in Bakersfield, California. That's located at exit 117 on California Route 58. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA at a $10 discount. Next, I'll discuss an Oregon wildlife crossing with Dan Roberts of the state DOT. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
A lot of things can mess up your truck while you're on the road, but one of the biggest is when your truck hits a large animal. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. For years, federal and state officials have looked for ways to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, and some think they found a solution, including Oregon. That's where they're building a large wildlife crossing across Interstate 5. I spoke recently with Dan Roberts, the project manager for the wildlife crossing with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and he's enthusiastic about what the crossing can do. Oregon is putting its first wildlife crossing over Interstate 5. I'm familiar with these. I've talked with people about them before. I've seen articles, but I think a lot of people are not familiar with what we're talking about. Can you kind of explain what we mean by the term wildlife crossing?
Sure, no problem. First off, thank you very much for having me on today to talk about the project. I really appreciate that opportunity. And this is, it's a new venture for the Oregon Department of Transportation. So it's very common across the country that we have a lot of wildlife trying to cross the highway systems that we've put in place. So we're actually just coming around now to try to address that. Because to be honest, in the 1950s, when Interstate 5 was built, wildlife mobility around the highway was not a primary focus of what we did in those days. So over the years, traffic volumes have increased, and we've seen more and more wildlife vehicle collisions. So with that is in 21, the Federal Highway Administration was actually awarded $350 million to target wildlife crossings across the country. And with that, different agencies were able to submit an application and show that they could really serve some benefit to the public from a traffic safety standpoint, as well as a wildlife preservation standpoint, that we could really focus on projects that could help alleviate this problem.
Okay. Now, I know that these kind of come in two flavors here. There are some that I've seen and talked about that are basically a tunnel under the highway. There's also ones that are over the highway. Which one is this going to be, and what helps you determine which one to use?
That's a great question. There are a number of places around the country that have done the undercrossings, and those really lend themselves well if you have the terrain in the area that an additional bridge on the roadway system creates a real nice natural undercrossing. And that was something that we explored in this. Is we had a local group, the Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition. It's a 17-member organization that really put a lot of effort into helping build the database of information about the animal movements in the area and looking at the crash history and how we could best serve this. So they brought us 8 different locations to evaluate based on their wildlife data. And with that, our goal then was to take their information and look at what would be the most constructible locations, because they didn't approach that really from the construction side of the question. They were just focused on the wildlife benefit. So at that point, we took their locations, looked at that, and tried to evaluate what would be the most cost-effective locations, and if we had issues with the terrain. Now, this is in the Siskiyou Pass on I-5. So with that, as you can imagine, we've got a number of seismic events that are always occurring at different scales in the area. And the terrain going through the mountain pass is in this location. We've got the northbound, southbound lanes are separated by about 140 feet horizontally. And then on top of that is we have a 40-foot grade separation. So we have a very distinct terrain that we've gone through to get the highway there. And back in the day, is different locations. Is we did put in a few bridges, and we did do a number of cuts into the existing terrain. So the location that we ended up choosing was a natural cut where we have a large bench on both sides of the highway. So that gives us kind of the most natural terrain to try to put some tunnels over the travel lanes of I-5, and then the structure will actually connect over the top of them. We looked at places to try to put a tunnel, and the distances were just pretty substantial. A lot of places is if we had the ability to daylight on both sides of the highway, is they could have been 600 feet long. And that would have to be an extremely large tunnel, which translates into extremely expensive tunnel. And with that is the undercrossings like that, when they're a tunnel, just aren't real conducive to the animals feeling comfortable of going into a long, dark tunnel to get to the other side. If you have a situation where you have more of an open bridge that is very near the surface, and the animals can see daylight easy on both sides, that's one thing. But we just didn't have the opportunity in any of the locations that we were evaluating that was really going to be feasible. So we dropped back and said, well, this looks like it's going to have to be an overcrossing.
You mentioned, of course, that the tunnel would have to be very large were you to use that choice, but this thing is not small. I've looked at the artist renderings, and it's pretty substantial. Can you kind of describe for people who can't see that what this looks like and how big it is?
Sure. And that is something unique to our project, is the scale of the structure itself is very substantial. And there are other projects across the country where you have more of a two-lane road in a rural situation. And with that, you can kind of build an arch over the road and just, connect things relatively easily with that. In our case, the terrain there trying to get across it's going to be about an 800-foot span to get the wildlife from one side to the other. And there's a lot that goes into that. And a lot of that feedback was provided by the coalition group, and all the biodiversity information that they provided to us is they could really help us identify a number of species that would be enticed to use this crossing. And the width of the crossing is going to be about 200 feet. So it is a massive structure, but what we're recreating here is really the most natural environment that we can for the wildlife to get to one side to the other. So just like the tunnels are less enticing to the wildlife, is if we can have the perfect world would be this nice big wide crossing where the wildlife had a perfect line of sight to get from one side to the other, and they could feel very comfortable. Any natural predators in the area they could see and they could adapt to. And the width of the structure, the 200 feet wide, is a big part of that, in that if you made a very narrow crossing, that can be as restrictive as the tunnel under the road, because if they're kind of boxed in and feel that they don't have an escape route or any substantial cover, is they might not be so willing to use the crossing. So the dimensions of this were really driven based on the wildlife needs.
And it's interesting you mentioned their cover. Of course, I think some people get an image here of just a concrete bridge over a highway. But in looking at the artist's renderings, this is, I don't want to use the word landscape because that brings up a different image, but it basically looks like a continuation of the existing forest over the highway.
Exactly. And we talk about landscape as far as what plants that we're going to be including on the surface of the structure, and how it ties into the environment in the area is part of that. But habitat is really the secondary part of all the vegetation that we're planning to put on the structure. So we're very cognizant of that. And yes, from just a functional standpoint, just a simple set of box beams across the roads would serve the purpose of making a connection, but we might not have a whole lot of wildlife willing to use that. So what we're doing is taking the natural environment, which is a part of the Siskiyou National Monument, which makes this location even more special, is that this area has over 300 species of wildlife that are present within the monument itself. And we unfortunately bisected that monument back in the 1950s when we built I-5. So we've had an enormous amount of wildlife on both sides of the highway that haven't been able to have easy access to the other side for quite some time. So with that, we're trying to recreate that natural environment from the monument on both sides, vegetation, cover, rocks, boulders, down trees. Our goal is to have it that we recreate that habitat so that the wildlife could actually cross the structure, and under ideal circumstances, they would never know I-5 is below them.
There have been other wildlife crossings built in other areas. As I mentioned before, I've talked with folks that have done them in other places, other states. And I'm sure that you looked at some of those when you were considering this project. How successful have those been in terms of keeping wildlife safe and off the highways?
Yes. I've been working with other DOTs across the country and looked at a number of their projects to see what was successful and find out why they made some of the decisions they did and how they approached it. There's some places like Interstate 25 in Colorado, just south of Denver. They have had a number of projects, and the terrain that they're working with is they really approached it from the standpoint of a series of bridge structures with undercrossings for the most part. And that just was really conducive to their area and the most efficient way they could accommodate those crossings. So they're one of the examples. And I was kind of amazed myself at the start of this, because that was one of the questions that would come up is, hey, we're going to put a lot of effort and money into building this crossing. And are you sure that animals are going to use it? And that was a very legitimate question. And the really neat thing about this is looking at the history of the other crossing and the multiple crossings across the country, is that it's very common that you see a 85 to 90% reduction in the wildlife vehicle collisions.
That was Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We'll be back in a moment with more of my interview with Dan. Meanwhile, you can learn more about the project at the Oregon DOT's website, oregon.gov/ODOT. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Capital Reman, the leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, has partnered with OOIDA to offer exclusive member benefits. Visit CapitalReman.com today to support America's transportation industry and take advantage of your benefits.
Landline Now, welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We discussed the concept of a wildlife crossing, as well as why the state is considering building this one and others. We also discussed why the specific location was chosen for the crossing, as well as what the crossing will look like, how big it will be, and how successful such crossings have been at protecting wildlife. We now continue that conversation in progress.
With the fencing coordinated with our crossing, is we see a very, very significant reduction in the crashes. And the other part of that was kind of amazing is how quickly the wildlife adapt to the ability to have a crossing. I came into this and thought, well, we do all this effort and this is great, but how long before we see results? The amazing thing is that with a number of documented studies, is we actually see wildlife responding within a year. They adapt to it very quickly, and you see that the mothers are bringing the young with them, and with that is the knowledge within the wildlife world is they utilize it very quickly, and it's amazing to see how quickly they do that.
We've talked a lot about the safety of the animals, but there is a safety aspect for the drivers on the road as well, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. It's a significant part of the equation in how we go about finding one of these locations and assessing the benefit of what's going to come from this. So with that is this is a mountain pass area, and sometimes we have really inclement weather on the mountain pass that makes things difficult. So if we have wildlife that are trying to transition across the roadway and the drivers trying to avoid those collisions, is that can create a real safety issue for the people. And that, of course, is a huge priority for us, is to try to keep all the motorists safe on the highway, minimize any of these potential crashes that could happen. And so just minimizing those crashes is a big reduction. That benefits from a safety standpoint, and the property damage that goes along with that. So anytime that we have a crash up there with wildlife that creates a response from our crews or from law enforcement, it just expands the risk element and the potential for other secondary crashes and injuries to take place with that. So yeah, it's anytime we can reduce those elements of potential crash, it's a great benefit to the traveling public. And 68% of our traffic on I-5 in this area of the country is our motor carrier folks and the freight folks that are keeping our goods moving up and down I-5. So as long as we can keep them moving freely, safely, it's a real benefit to everybody.
You mentioned some of the different types of wildlife earlier that are in that area that might use the crossing, but I'm wondering if you can kind of go over it in a little bit more detail, because it does sound like there's a lot of different species that could be using this. Kind of list off for us, if you will, what kind of wildlife we're talking about.
Sure. We have a lot of these wildlife crossings tend to be focused on the larger mammals. So your deer, your elk, cougar, black bear in the area. And we have a crash history with all of these larger species. But we also have smaller. We have a number of bobcat in the area, and the Pacific fisher, which is fairly rare. And a number of our smaller species are actually on either the endangered species list or a watch level of concern that they're being tracked and monitored. So we have those larger ones. Something that was new to me when I first got into this project and working with some of our habitat folks is that we're focusing on pollinators in the area. So with that is, as you can imagine, you look at the distance to go across where our highway is, that if we can provide habitat and enticement for, we've got some bumblebee species that are very rare and can be helpful, that if we provide habitat for them, they will have a way to safely cross from one side of the monument to the other part of this too. So that gives you a little bit of a range of the species we're dealing with. Interesting side story. One of the locations that I've been studying back in Colorado is this particular case is they built an undercrossing, which was just most conducive to their situation. And when I had a chance to visit their site after it was done, and one of the things that they had included was a large windrow of brush all the way across the crossing. And in the middle of it is they had actually put, they called it their frog cam. And it was a camera there to monitor the smaller species that would utilize that to go from one side to the other and feel very comfortable with that cover from, predators possibly being there. And they had documented 17 of the larger species they expected to use the crossing. And a year later, they found that all 17 of those species had shown up. What they didn't really understand or have a good grasp of was what the smaller species were. And they expected to have some frogs, some salamanders. They had water in this particular location. But within the first year, they found they had 17 additional species that they really didn't have on the radar screen that had utilized the crossing. So that doubled the number of species who had found some benefit to all their efforts there.
Something that kind of goes along with what you're talking about there, that people think of the large mammals, they don't think of those little animals. But I'm wondering if you could explain just a little bit in terms of why those smaller species are important. What is the role that they fulfill in that ecosystem? What are they doing?
Oh, boy, that's a broad range. And yes, when you look at the entire ecosystem, especially being a part of the monument in a protected area, is a lot of effort over the years has been put into that and really put an environment together that all these species can really thrive. So with that, I'm not a biologist by trade, so but I can share some of what I've learned is the chipmunks, the squirrels, the skunks. As surprising as it might be, they have a very distinct role to play in the overall ecosystem. And they found that it's very beneficial that we really help all those different species thrive. That makes the entire culture ecosystem thrive. And that's one of the unique things about being in the Siskiyou National Monument is just the depth of the biodiversity that we have in that area is it's amazing. And all of it is interrelated. So if we were trying to create a situation where we were just getting the larger mammals crossing and didn't really address that for the smaller, you could see some of that, the prey and predator relationships in there that we might be, sustaining one element of the biodiversity and not really helping with the other. And then we could wind up with an imbalance there. So
let's talk a little bit about finances. This is not going to be cheap, obviously, and I think you did refer earlier to some of the aspects of this, but how is the state funding this project? Where is the money going to come from?
Sure. Two elements of our funding here is our state legislature was supportive and understood the value of these wildlife crossings, and Oregon is still behind the curve in regards to the number of crossings that we have. We have a group that worked in Central Oregon on doing several undercrossings, and that was more of the bridge structure. And so they saw the value in that because they saw 85 to 90% reduction in the crashes along their stretch of highway. So that demonstrated pretty much to our state legislators that there is value in doing this. And so the state allocated $7 million a couple of years ago that was specifically to fund the front end, the research and the development and the design efforts to put together a package for these crossings. And part of that was we worked with groups like the Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition. I mentioned they had been studying several years of building the data. So we were able to utilize the benefits from their work to partner with us. And then we looked at those locations and said, okay, we can expend some design efforts here to to actually work on the preliminary elements of a project. So that's what we did. We were awarded those funds to do the PE phase. It's the professional engineering phase, really the design up front to assess this location. And actually we're able to drill some geotech holes so that we got the data that if we choose to build a structure in this location, we know what the foundation is going to be like and we'll be successful. So we moved along in that design effort to build a large portion of this upfront engineering effort. And once we got that far, we knew the location, the size, and the scale of what this was going to be. Is Federal Highways Administration has a wildlife crossing pilot program. And with that, the federal government had set aside $350 million for federal highways to allocate to wildlife crossings all across the country. And with that is the states and agencies were invited to submit an application. And there's a whole list of criteria that they wanted to see that would help them see that this would be a beneficial project to serve both the traveling public from a safety standpoint, as well as how beneficial it would be to the wildlife environment and help that ecosystem.
That was Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We'll be back in a moment with more of my conversation with Dan. Meanwhile, you can learn more about the project at the Oregon DOT's website, oregon.gov/ODOT. Again, that website is oregon.gov/ODOT. We'll have a link to that website at our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline at the top of the page. That will bring you to where we have all the website links, email addresses, and phone numbers that we mention here on the show. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. Please stay with us through a short commercial break. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Running on ultra-low sulfur diesel? Stay protected this winter with Howe's Diesel Treat and Diesel Lifeline. Steer clear of gel and ice with North America's #1 trusted brand. Find Howe's products nationwide at select retailers, auto parts stores, truck stops, and on Amazon.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We now continue that conversation in progress.
We were able to demonstrate clearly that we had a traffic safety improvement that could be had with a crossing in this location. And being in the Siskiyou National Monument is that made our wildlife element of the project even more special, and such a broad diversity of the animals there really helped pull this together. So our application was approved by Federal Highways. So the funding for the construction part of this is coming from Federal Highways, and being that it's in this dedicated pool of money for crossing pilot program, is that we will all the construction, the $33 million that we were awarded, comes from that Federal Highways program. And it's dedicated funding that is specifically just for a wildlife crossing project.
Okay. Do you anticipate that the state is going to create other wildlife crossings, more of these? Do you think they're going to be overpasses, underpasses, and kind of, if you are, where might those end up?
Well, yes, it's our goal to make this successful, number one, and help demonstrate the benefit of these projects. And we have a very substantial number of crossings that the Oregon Department of Wildlife has data on to isolate those locations that would be beneficial. So I could probably get you a list of 300 to 400 locations across the state of Oregon that have been studied and shown that there's a benefit to having a wildlife crossing there. So, and they range from very large to very small. So that's part of the program, is we go through and evaluate that and see where we can get the most benefit that from a project. And that it's unique in this that no two locations are similar. So the values of those is part of what's the challenge to this crossing. Just like with ours, is we've got a national monument on both sides, have very substantial wildlife. And then on top of that is, what's the environment to accomplish that crossing? And you can see this one has a lot of elements of challenge with that, but there's also a huge benefit to reestablishing this connection. So there will be a number of projects. We are actively talking about that and would like to see, dozens of crossing projects come about in Oregon.
That's a tall order, though. That's a lot of money to get all those done. Do you think there's the political will there in this state to keep going in terms of paying for more of these?
I think so. It's a partnership between the federal government and the state government. And with that, Oregon's environment, the rural nature, the forestry, the wildlife element of the importance within the state of Oregon is we see a lot of value in helping to preserve that wildlife and put them in a situation to thrive, as well as keep people safe.
Okay. Something you mentioned earlier, that the Oregon Department of Transportation has collaborated with a group called the Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition on this project, and I kind of assume others. Tell us a little bit about that group. Who are they? What do they do? How did they get together?
They actually came together, I believe it was about 20 or 21, and it's a really diverse group. It was a bunch of scientists, biologists, naturalists in the area that their real focus that I think brought a lot of them together was the Siskiyou National Monument. And they have a broad, diverse background of expertise that they brought to their coalition. So I was a little amazed at the diversity of the membership. We have everybody from the folks that are focused on the wildlife to the Oregon Hunters Association. So to bring a group together with that, which obviously have different interests, is the Hunters Association has been fantastic, and they really want to see the preservation of all the species in there and wants to see an environment that would help them thrive as well. So there's been a lot of common ground for the group to come together and support the efforts. But they were the ones who initially started, they did their own fundraising, and they hired their own consultants to do some of the wildlife studies that were done. So they really formed up as a group and took a very professional, proactive approach to wanting to see a benefit to the monument. And they said, how best could we do that? So they partnered with the other groups, went after funding, worked with a variety of organizations to help fund their efforts. And they brought to us a very nice, detailed, data-driven package of information that said, we think this would be, very beneficial to the Siskiyous, to this area. And we would love to see you, they'd love to see us get a crossing in all 8 locations that they suggested. And we may get that done one day. But for now, it was quite interesting. As they brought that information to us, they had scored through a series of evaluations and metrics of their study. And with that, they came up with one location that was by far the most beneficial from the wildlife perspective. And as it would turn out, as we approached it from the construction side of that discussion, and okay, what could we actually build and how effective could we be with this project, is fortunately we both landed at the same location as the top priority. So their wildlife score was the place we said was the most effective for us to build the crossing.
Okay. Dan, that's all I have. Is there anything else about this project or the overall concept of wildlife crossings that you'd like to get across to people, or maybe I didn't ask about that I should have?
I'd just like to emphasize that the benefit of these crossings is enormous, and the reduction in the crashes, the helping sustain the various species that are served by being able to have a crossing is a value. It's a much larger value than just the saving the property damage and those things that go along when you think of some of these collisions when wildlife gets hit. So it's far-reaching, the benefits of this that serve extended purposes. And just like everybody, it was eye-opening for me, and I'm certainly trying to share that with everybody. And seeing the success of the other crossings is, I think that's something that's really going to benefit our region substantially.
Fantastic. Dan, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on, and look forward to talking to you throughout the course of the project, if you'd like.
That was Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. You can learn more about the project at the Oregon DOT's website, oregon.gov/ODOT. Again, that website is oregon.gov/ODOT. And we'll have a link to that website at our website, landlinenow.com. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and information. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
A son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer,
I farm, I'm a veteran,
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us. Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.